My mother-in-law sold my wedding dress while I was in the hospital. I was admitted on a Tuesday afternoon, just after 4. The ER smelled like disinfectant and overheated plastic, and the intake nurse kept calling me sweetie while asking questions I couldn't answer without stopping to breathe. They put a blood pressure cuff on my arm that squeezed too tight, then loosened it and apologized. I remember staring at the ceiling tiles and counting the cracks because it felt easier than focusing on the pain that kept rolling through my abdomen in waves. By the time they wheeled me upstairs, my phone had already buzzed 6 times. I didn't look at it until a nurse helped me into a room and told me I'd be there overnight, maybe longer. I had my charger in my bag. I plugged my phone in and saw the missed calls were from my husband and his mother. 2 from him, 4 from her. I texted him first. I'm in a room. They're running tests. I'll call when I can. Almost immediately, his mom called again. I let it ring. I wasn't in the mood to explain anything to anyone, except the doctor who was supposed to tell me why my body felt like it was turning itself inside out. Around 7, after blood draws and an ultrasound, and a doctor who spoke too fast, I finally called my husband. He sounded worried but distracted, like he was talking while doing something else. He asked where I was, how I felt, if they knew what was wrong. I told him they suspected an infection and wanted to keep me another night. He said his mom had been trying to reach me all day. I told him I saw the calls. She's just concerned, he said. I didn't respond. I closed my eyes while he talked, the phone warm against my ear. I remember him saying he'd come by after work the next morning. I fell asleep early, drugged and exhausted. When I woke up, it was still dark. My phone screen lit up with a notification. Not a call or a text. An email. The subject line read, "Your item has sold." At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. I thought maybe it was spam. I don't sell things online often, and when I do, it's old furniture or clothes I don't wear anymore. Certainly not anything important. I opened the email anyway. It was from the consignment platform I'd used once, months earlier, to sell a pair of shoes. The body of the email listed an item title, a price, and a buyer confirmation. Item, ivory lace, A-line wedding gown, size 6. My heart started beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. I sat up too quickly and the room tilted. The IV pole rattled beside the bed. I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over, waiting for them to change into something else. Shoes, dress, anything but that. But it stayed the same. Wedding gown. I scrolled down. There was a thumbnail image. Small but unmistakable. The lace pattern at the bodice. The slight discoloration near the hem where I'd stepped on it outside the venue. My dress. The one that had been hanging in the spare bedroom closet at my mother-in-law's house. I felt cold all over, like someone had turned the air conditioning on full blast inside my chest. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the phone with both of them. I tapped through to the account details. It wasn't my account. It was hers. Her name was right there, along with her profile picture. The same smiling headshot she used on Facebook. The timestamp said the item had been listed at 9:12 a.m., sold at 2:47 p.m. I was already in the hospital by then. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I pressed the call button and told the nurse I felt dizzy. She came in and asked if I was in pain. I told her I just needed a minute. She adjusted my IV and told me to take slow breaths. I nodded and stared at the wall until my pulse settled enough that I didn't feel like I was going to pass out. Then I called my husband. He answered on the second ring. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. "Are you okay?" "Did your mother sell my wedding dress today?" I said. There was a pause. Not a long one, but long enough. "What?" he said. "My wedding dress," I repeated. "The one I left in the closet at her house. Did she sell it?" "I don't know," he said. "Why would she?" "She listed it this morning, and it sold this afternoon," I said. My voice sounded strange to me, flat and too loud at the same time. "I have the confirmation email. It's gone." Another pause. I could hear background noise now, a TV maybe, or dishes. "She told me she was cleaning," he said slowly. "I didn't think—" "Cleaning what?" I said. "She doesn't own that dress." "I know," he said. "I know. Let me call her." "No," I said. "I'm calling her." I hung up before he could argue. When I called her, she didn't answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. I stared at the phone, waiting for it to ring back. It didn't. A few minutes later, a text came through. "I was going to tell you. I didn't think you'd want it anymore." I read it once. Then again. My stomach twisted, sharp and deep, and I had to press my hand against it to keep from crying out. I typed back with shaking fingers. "You sold my wedding dress while I'm in the hospital." 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. "I'll explain later," she wrote. I set the phone down on the bed beside me and stared at the ceiling tiles again, counting the cracks. This time, I couldn't focus enough to keep track. I didn't sleep after that. The nurse came in around 5 to check my vitals, and I pretended I had been dozing. As soon as she left, I picked up my phone again and reread the text from my mother-in-law. I'll explain later. It sat there like it was supposed to calm me down, like I was expected to accept that explanation was a favor she could choose the timing of. By morning, my husband showed up with a coffee in one hand, and his jacket half zipped. He looked tired, like he'd slept on the couch. He kissed my forehead and asked how I was feeling. then sat in the chair by the bed and rubbed his face with both hands. "She won't answer my calls either," he said. "She texted me that she didn't mean any harm." I didn't say anything. I was watching his hands. He kept flexing his fingers like he didn't know what to do with them. After the doctor came through and told me they wanted to keep me one more night, my husband asked if I wanted him to stay. I told him to go to work. I didn't want him there, hovering, asking me to calm down when I hadn't even gotten angry yet. When he left, I finally let myself think about the dress, without the shock dulling everything. I'd bought it 2 years earlier, on a Saturday in February, with my sister and my best friend. I'd paid for it myself, not because anyone asked me to, but because I wanted it to be mine. I remembered signing the receipt and, feeling a small, stupid sense of pride over that. After the wedding, I didn't know what to do with it. Our apartment was small and the closet barely fit our coats. My mother-in-law had offered to store it at her house. She had a guest room that never got used, and she said it would be safer there. She even bought a garment bag for it. At the time, that felt generous. I'd known her for years by then. Long enough to know she liked being involved in things, long enough to know she didn't like being told no. But she'd always framed it as helpfulness. She remembered birthdays. She brought over casseroles when someone was sick. She asked a lot of questions and expected answers, but I'd chalked that up to concern. My husband was close with her, not in a way that felt unhealthy at first, just familiar. She called him every day on her drive home from work. If he didn't answer, she'd call again later. He thought that was normal. I thought it was a lot, but I didn't say anything. When we were planning the wedding, she had opinions about everything. The venue was too far. The flowers were too simple. The guest list needed adjusting. She wanted to invite people I'd never met. When I pushed back, she smiled and said she just wanted the day to be perfect for us. I let a lot of things slide because it was easier than arguing. Because every time I did argue, my husband got quiet afterward. Not angry, just withdrawn. Like I'd made him choose sides even when I hadn't asked him to. That pattern continued after we got married. She had a key to our apartment in case of emergencies. She stopped by unannounced to drop off leftovers. She reorganized our kitchen drawers once while I was at work. When I mentioned it later, she laughed and said she couldn't help herself. The dress was just another thing she'd taken control of without asking. Except this time, it wasn't something I could pretend didn't matter. That afternoon, while I was still in the hospital, she finally called. I answered on the first ring. "I didn't think you'd want it anymore," she said immediately, like she'd rehearsed the line. "It's just been sitting there." "It wasn't yours to sell," I said. There was a sigh on the other end. "I know that, technically. But I was just trying to help. You never said you wanted to keep it." "I never said you could get rid of it," I said. She told me she'd assumed I wouldn't need it again, that it was taking up space, that someone else could use it. She said she'd put the money aside for me. "That's not the point," I said. She got quiet then. When she spoke again, her tone changed. "You're very emotional right now. You're sick. This isn't the time to talk about it." I stared at the wall while she talked. She said we could discuss it when I was feeling better. She said my husband agreed it wasn't worth getting upset over. She said she'd meant well. After we hung up, I cried for the first time since I'd been admitted. Not loudly. I pressed my face into the pillow and cried until my throat hurt. When I got discharged the next day, my husband picked me up. The drive home was quiet. At one point, he reached for my hand, then stopped halfway and put it back on the steering wheel. "She didn't mean to hurt you," he said finally. "I know," I said, and I did know. That was part of what made it worse. When we got home, there was a small envelope on the kitchen counter. Cash inside, the exact amount listed in the email. On the front, in her handwriting, were the words, "From the dress." I didn't touch it. I stayed home from work for the rest of the week. The doctor had written a note, something vague about rest and monitoring symptoms, but mostly, I just didn't want to see anyone. The apartment felt too quiet during the day, like it was waiting for something to happen. The envelope with the cash stayed on the counter, where my husband had left it. He didn't bring it up again, and neither did I. On Friday morning, my mother-in-law showed up unannounced. I was in sweatpants, sitting on the couch with a heating pad on my stomach when I heard her key in the lock. She didn't knock. She never did. She let herself in like she always had, calling out my name in a cheerful voice that felt completely disconnected from the way my chest tightened when I heard it. "I brought soup," she said, stepping into the living room with a plastic container in her hands. "You look pale." I didn't stand up. I didn't thank her. I just watched as she set the soup on the coffee table and looked around, taking in the room like she was checking for dust. "I hope you're feeling better," she said. "Hospital stays can really take it out of you." "I didn't know you were coming," I said. She smiled at me, small and tight. "I have a key." I nodded. That was true. I'd never liked it, but every time I suggested we take it back, my husband said it would cause unnecessary drama. She sat down in the armchair across from me and folded her hands in her lap. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she leaned forward. "I hate that things feel tense," she said, "especially when you're not well." "I'm not confused about what happened," I said. "If that's what you're worried about." She waved a hand. "Of course not. But you have to understand my perspective." I waited. "You left the dress at my house for over a year," she said. "You never asked for it back. You never mentioned preserving it or passing it down. I thought you'd moved on." "I was busy," I said. "That doesn't mean I gave it to you." She tilted her head, studying me. "I just think this has become bigger than it needs to be." That was the first time I felt it clearly. Not just irritation or overstepping, but something deliberate. The way she framed it as my reaction being the problem, not her action. Like, the facts were flexible and the only solid thing was that I was being unreasonable. I want the dress back, I said. Her expression shifted just slightly. That's not possible. You sold it, I said. I know. And the buyer already picked it up, she said. I can't undo that. Then you shouldn't have done it, I said. She sighed again, louder this time. I've already given you the money. I thought that would settle it. It doesn't, I said. She leaned back in the chair. What do you want from me then? An apology, I thought. Ownership. Something that didn't sound like she was humoring a child. I want you to acknowledge that you crossed a line, I said. She looked genuinely surprised. Then she laughed softly, shaking her head. I think you're projecting a lot onto this. You've been under stress, newly married, health issues. It's natural to latch onto something. I stared at her. You sold my wedding dress. And I compensated you, she said. More than fairly, I might add. That doesn't make it okay, I said. She leaned forward again, her voice dropping. You know, I've always tried very hard to support this marriage. I welcomed you into the family. I gave you space in my home. I look out for my son. There it was, the shift. The reminder of who she believed had the real claim. I'm not attacking you, I said. I'm asking you to respect me. She pursed her lips. Respect goes both ways. After that, she talked for another 10 minutes. About how difficult it was to let go as a mother. About how she worried my illness would put strain on my husband. About how conflict wasn't good for my recovery. She said all of it in a calm, measured voice, like she was offering advice. When she finally stood to leave, she patted my shoulder. Try not to dwell on this, she said. It's done. After she left, I felt hollow. Not angry, not sad. Just emptied, out, like something had been taken that I didn't know how to name yet. That night, my husband came home late. I told him she'd been there. He sighed and took off his shoes. She told me, he said. She said you were really upset. I was clear, I said. She doesn't think she did anything wrong. He rubbed the back of his neck. She's old-fashioned. She doesn't always think things through. She thinks them through just fine, I said. She just doesn't think I matter. That's not fair, he said immediately. Isn't it? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, She gave you the money. Maybe we should just let it go. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something else was happening. Not just her minimizing what she'd done, but him helping her do it. Not out of malice, but out of habit. If I let this go, I said slowly, what happens next time? He shrugged. What next time? I didn't have an answer he'd accept. I went to bed early and lay there listening to him brush his teeth, thinking about the dress. About the day I wore it. About how carefully I'd folded it before putting it into the garment bag at her house, trusting it would stay there until I decided otherwise. I realized then that this wasn't about fabric or lace or money. It was about someone deciding, without asking, that my attachment didn't count. And then convincing everyone else that I was the problem for noticing. Things changed after that, but not in a dramatic way. There were no shouting matches or ultimatums. It was quieter than that, which made it harder to point to. It felt like the volume on my life had been turned down without my permission. My mother-in-law started coming by more often, always with a reason, dropping off food, checking on me, returning something my husband had supposedly left at her house. She never mentioned the dress again, and I didn't either, but it hovered in every interaction like a smell you couldn't quite place. She began phrasing things carefully, like she was choosing her words for an audience. If my husband was in the room, she'd say, I know you've been sensitive lately, or you've had a lot going on. If he wasn't, she'd lower her voice and say things like, I worry about how you interpret things, or you tend to assume the worst. Once, when I corrected her about an appointment time she'd gotten wrong, she smiled and said, Are you sure? You've seemed forgetful since the hospital. That was the first time I felt a flicker of fear instead of anger. I started paying closer attention, not just to her, but to the way my husband responded to her. If she made a comment that stung, he'd glance at me quickly, like he was checking to see if I was going to react. If I stayed quiet, his shoulders relaxed. If I spoke up, even calmly, he'd get tense. She didn't mean it like that, he'd say, later, or, you're reading into it, or, can we not do this right now? I tried explaining once, carefully, the way she twisted things. How she reframed her actions as concern, and my reactions as instability. He listened, nodding, but his eyes glazed over halfway through. You're still recovering, he said. Everything feels bigger right now. That word again, recovering. Like my judgment was temporarily offline. The envelope of cash disappeared from the counter one day while I was out. When I asked about it, my husband said he'd deposited it into our joint account. I figured that made the most sense, he said. It's your money anyway. I checked the balance later. It was there, mixed in with our rent payment and groceries and utilities. The dress, reduced to a line item. A week later, my mother-in-law asked if she could store some boxes in our spare room. Just for a little while, she said. I'm reorganizing. I said no, politely, but clearly. She blinked like she hadn't expected that answer. Then she laughed. Oh, okay, I just thought it would be easier. When my husband got home, she called him. I could hear her through the phone from across the room. Not the words, but the tone. Soft. Hurt. After he hung up, he asked why I'd said no. I don't want her stuff here, I said. I want our space to be ours. She's just asking for help, he said. So was I said, when I asked her not to sell my dress. He didn't respond. He went into the kitchen and started making dinner like the conversation was over. A few days later, she showed up with the boxes anyway. I know you said no, she said lightly, setting them down by the door. But I already had them in the car. I stood there, feeling something inside me tighten. You need to take them back. She looked at my husband. Can you believe this? She said, smiling like it was a joke. She's so rigid lately. He hesitated. Just for a second. Then he picked up one of the boxes and carried it into the spare room. It's temporary, he said to me. Let's not make a big deal out of it. That night, I lay awake listening to him breathe, my mind racing. It wasn't about the boxes, or the dress. It was about the way my no didn't hold any weight once she decided it shouldn't. The escalation was subtle, but steady. She started correcting me in front of people, telling stories that painted me as dramatic or confused. If I objected, she'd raise her eyebrows and say, "That's not how I remember it." Once at a family dinner, she mentioned the dress. I sold it for a good price, she said casually, passing the salt. You're welcome. Everyone laughed, including my husband. I didn't. When I stayed quiet, she leaned over and said, "See? We can joke about it now." Later that night, I told my husband I felt humiliated. She was kidding, he said. You have to stop holding on to this. I'm not holding on to the dress, I said. I'm holding on to what it meant. He exhaled sharply. You're exhausting sometimes. That word stayed with me. After that, things moved faster. She started suggesting doctors, asking if I'd considered therapy, mentioning how worried she was about my stress levels. All of it wrapped in concern. One afternoon, while I was folding laundry, she said, You know, when I was your age, I didn't get so upset over material things. I looked at her. It's not about material things, she smiled. That's what worries me. I felt myself shrinking, questioning my reactions, replaying conversations in my head to see if I really had overreacted, if I was being unreasonable, if the pain I felt was somehow self-inflicted. The night it fully escalated, my husband told me his mother had suggested we delay trying for kids. She thinks we should focus on your health, he said, and on stabilizing things. Did you ask her for that advice? I said. No, he said, but she has a point. I stared at him. She doesn't get a say. He looked tired. She's just worried. I realized then that she wasn't just crossing lines anymore. She was redrawing them, and my husband, whether he meant to or not, was handing her the pen. I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I sat on the edge of the tub and tried to breathe. My reflection looked unfamiliar. Smaller. Like someone who was slowly being edited out of her own life. And for the first time since the hospital, I wondered if the dress wasn't the worst thing she'd taken. The proof didn't come in a dramatic burst. It arrived quietly, in pieces, the way things usually do, when someone assumes you'll never put them together. It started with an email. I was looking for something else in our shared inbox, a receipt for a utility bill, when I saw her name in the subject line. It wasn't sent to me. It was sent to my husband. But we shared the account for household things, and he never cleaned it out. The subject read, dress situation. I clicked it. She'd written it the morning I was admitted to the hospital. 8:03 a.m. I'm going to list the dress today, she wrote. I know this might upset her, but it's better to do it quickly. She's emotional right now, and this will blow over. Don't say anything unless she brings it up. I'll handle it. I felt a cold clarity settle over me, sharp and clean. No assumptions. No interpretations. Just her words, laid out in plain text. I scrolled. My husband had replied at 8:17 a.m. If you think that's best. I don't want to stress her out. She'd written back at 8:19. Exactly. She doesn't need more stress. Trust me. I sat there staring at the screen, my hands steady in a way they hadn't been for weeks. The room felt very still, like the air had stopped moving. She hadn't acted impulsively. She hadn't misunderstood. She hadn't meant well and messed up. She'd planned it. She'd anticipated my reaction and dismissed it before it even happened. And my husband had agreed to let her do it, as long as he didn't have to deal with the fallout. I forwarded the email chain to myself. That should have been enough. It should have settled everything. But once I saw it, I started noticing more. I checked her consignment account again, scrolled through past listings. There were timestamps, photos, descriptions written in her voice. I recognized the background in some of the pictures. The spare bedroom at her house. My dress wasn't the only thing she'd sold that didn't belong to her. A coat that had been mine, from years ago, that I'd left there one winter. A set of dishes my husband and I had received as a wedding gift, and never picked up after storing them temporarily. Items listed as unused or like new, priced carefully. I checked the dates. They lined up with other moments I remembered, feeling uneasy but brushing it off. Times she'd said something was gone, or donated without asking. I took screenshots of everything. That evening, when my husband got home, I asked him to sit down. I found something, I said. He looked wary, already bracing himself. Can this wait? I had a long day. No, I said, it can't. I handed him my phone, opened the email. He read it once, then again. His face changed, not into anger, but into something like resignation. You went through my emails? He said. They're in our shared account, I she said. She sold my dress while I was being admitted to the hospital. This is about that. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled. She shouldn't have put it in writing. That was his response. Read it again, I said. I read it, he said. I know what it says. She decided I was emotional, and that it would blow over, I said. You agreed. I didn't think she'd actually do it that day, he said. You were already sick. That's worse, I said. He rubbed his temples. I didn't think it was a big deal. It's a dress. It's not just the dress, I said. She's been selling my things, other things, without asking. I showed him the screenshots, the listings, the dates. He stared at them, his jaw tight. She was just trying to help, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. She made money off my belongings, I said. And you knew about at least one of them, and you let it happen. He didn't answer. I felt something settle in me then. Not relief, not triumph, just a finality. The kind you feel when you stop waiting for someone to understand. I'm going to talk to her, I said. He looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean I'm going to show her this, I said, and I'm going to ask for everything she's sold back, or the money from all of it, not just the dress. She'll be devastated, he said. She planned this while I was in the ER, I said. I don't care. He stood up, pacing. This is going to cause a huge fight. It already did, I said. You just let me be the only one feeling it. We went to her house the next afternoon. She greeted us like nothing was wrong, hugged my husband, asked how I was feeling, offered tea. I didn't sit down. I found your email, I said. Her smile froze. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. I handed her my phone. She read it slowly. Her face didn't crumble. It hardened. You invaded our privacy, she said. You sold my property while I was hospitalized, I said. And you told my husband not to tell me. She crossed her arms. I was protecting him. From me? I said. She looked at him then. I didn't want her overreacting. I laughed once, short and humorless. You decided my reaction in advance. You decided it didn't matter. She straightened. You left things at my house. You didn't communicate. I did what I thought was best. You made money off it, I said. How much total? She didn't answer. I pulled up the screenshots. I want all of it. Every dollar from every item you sold that belonged to me. And I want my things back that you haven't sold. She scoffed. This is ridiculous. I turned to my husband. Say something. He stood there silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. That was the proof, too. Not just the emails or the listings, but the way he couldn't bring himself to contradict her, even now. I realized then that there was no misunderstanding left to clear up, no confusion to resolve. Everything was exactly as it looked, and I was finally done pretending otherwise. The drive home from her house was silent. Not the tense kind where words are waiting to spill out, but the kind where everything that needs to be said has already been said, and no one wants to touch it. My husband kept both hands on the wheel, eyes straight ahead. I watched the streetlights pass and felt strangely detached, like I was observing someone else's life from a distance. When we got home, he went straight to the bedroom and closed the door. I stayed in the kitchen and leaned against the counter, my legs weak in a way that had nothing to do with my health. I thought about the way she'd crossed her arms, the way he'd looked at the floor, the way no one had actually denied what I'd accused them of. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I'd cried in the hospital, cried after she left that first day. Cried quietly in the shower when the water covered the sound. But now there was nothing. Just a hollow pressure in my chest. Like something had collapsed inward and left space behind. Later that night, my husband came out and sat across from me at the table. She's very upset, he said. I nodded. I'm sure. She feels attacked, he said. She thinks you hate her. I looked at him. Do you know what she did? Yes, he said quickly. I know. Then why are you telling me how she feels? I asked. He hesitated. Because this is tearing everyone apart. I waited for him to include me in that group. He didn't. I trusted her, I said. And I trusted you. He rubbed his face. I didn't think it would get this far. You didn't think, I said. That's the problem. That night, I slept on the couch. Not because we agreed to it, but because I couldn't stand the idea of lying next to him. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that email. She's emotional right now, and this will blow over. I woke up with a headache and a sore neck. The apartment felt unfamiliar in the morning light, like I'd woken up somewhere temporary. I made coffee and sat at the table, staring at my phone. Around 10, my mother-in-law texted me. I'm disappointed in you. I didn't respond. Another text came a few minutes later. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me. I turned my phone face down. When my husband left for work, he didn't kiss me goodbye. He paused by the door like he might say something, then didn't. The emotional fallout came in waves. Some hours I felt steady, almost numb. Other times, something small would crack it open. A photo from our wedding popping up in my memories. A dress in a shop window. Even the spare room, now full of her boxes, made my throat tighten. I started doubting myself again. That was the worst part. Even with proof, even with emails and screenshots, a voice in my head kept asking if I'd gone too far, if I should have handled it differently, if I'd humiliated her unnecessarily. That voice sounded a lot like her. I called my sister that afternoon. I hadn't told her the full story before. Just vague complaints. This time I told her everything. The hospital, the sale, the emails, my husband's silence. She listened, without interrupting. "That's not normal," she said when I finished. "None of that is normal." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "I feel like I'm losing my grip on reality." "You're not," she said. "They're trying to make you feel that way." That night, my husband and I argued for the first time in months. Not raised voices, but sharp edges. I told him I felt betrayed. He told me I was making him choose. I told him he already had. "She's my mother," he said. "And I'm your wife," I said. Or at least I thought I was. He didn't answer. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie awake, replaying conversations, rewriting them in my head. Thinking of things I should have said, wondering how long this had been happening without me noticing, how many times my boundaries had been quietly moved. One morning, I woke up and realized my chest hurt. Not physically, but with a tightness that made it hard to breathe. Got in the edge of the bed and tried to calm myself down, counting breaths like the nurse had told me to. I wasn't just grieving the dress. I was grieving the version of my life where I felt safe, where my things were mine, where my feelings didn't need approval. My mother-in-law stopped coming by after that, not because she respected my space, but because she was waiting, letting the silence do the work. My husband talked to her on the phone every night, stepping outside or closing the bedroom door. When I asked what she said, he'd shrug. Same stuff. One evening, he told me she'd been crying. "She says she doesn't recognize you anymore," he said. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. She never did. That was when I felt it fully. The loneliness. Not the kind you feel when you're alone, but the kind you feel when you're with people who have decided not to see you. I started keeping notes in my phone. Dates, quotes, small incidents. Not because I planned to use them, but because I needed something solid. Something that didn't shift depending on who was telling the story. The emotional fallout wasn't explosive. It was corrosive. It ate away at my confidence, my trust, my sense of proportion. It made me second-guess every reaction, every feeling. But underneath it, something else was forming. Quieter, slower. A clarity that didn't need their agreement. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with it, but I knew I couldn't unsee what I'd seen, and I couldn't go back to being the person who accepted it. The first external consequence came from somewhere I didn't expect. I got a call from the consignment platform. Not customer service exactly, but a dispute resolution rep. She asked if I was aware that an item sold under my mother-in-law's account had been flagged. I asked why. She said the buyer had reached out after noticing a discrepancy between the seller's description and a handwritten note found inside the garment bag. I felt my stomach drop. Apparently, when the buyer got home and unzipped the bag, there was a folded paper taped to the inside pocket. A preservation receipt from the bridal shop. My name was printed on it. Not my mother-in-law's. The buyer had Googled me. My name wasn't common. She found my LinkedIn profile, then my Facebook. Then she saw photos from my wedding. Photos of me wearing the dress she'd just bought. She asked the platform if it was possible the dress had been sold without my consent. The rep was careful with her words. She said they were required to investigate claims of unauthorized sale. She asked if the item belonged to me. "Yes," I said. She asked if I'd given permission for it to be sold. "No," I shastly said. She asked if I'd like to file a formal report. I told her yes. I didn't tell my husband right away. I needed to understand what that meant first. The rep explained that the platform could freeze my mother-in-law's account, withhold funds from pending sales, and potentially reverse the transaction if the buyer agreed. She said there could also be legal implications if ownership was contested. After I hung up, I sat very still on the couch. My hands were cold. This wasn't just a family issue anymore. It was documented, logged, real in a way that couldn't be smoothed over with tone or intent. That afternoon, my phone rang again. This time, it was the buyer. She sounded nervous, apologetic. She said she felt awful. She'd bought the dress for her own wedding and had been excited, but once she realized what might have happened, she didn't feel right keeping it. "I can send it back," she said. "I don't want something that was taken from someone." I swallowed hard. "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate that." We talked logistics, shipping, timing. She asked if I was okay. I told her I would be. When I hung up, I cried. Not because I was sad, but because someone who owed me nothing had shown more care than the people who did. When my husband got home that night, I told him everything. He sat down slowly, like his legs had given out. "You reported her?" "Yes," I said. "The buyer contacted them first." "She could get banned," he said. "She could get into trouble." "She sold something that wasn't hers," I said. That's not on me. She's going to be furious, he said. I looked at him. She planned this while I was in the ER. He didn't argue that. He just stared at his hands. The consequences spread outward from there. The platform froze her account. They withheld the payment from the dress and flagged her other recent sales. She called my husband in tears, saying she was being treated like a criminal. She left me a voicemail I didn't answer, her voice shaking as she said she'd never forgive me for humiliating her. At a family gathering I didn't attend, she told relatives I was unstable, that I'd reported her out of spite, that I was trying to ruin her reputation. It didn't work the way she expected. My sister-in-law called me one night and asked what really happened. I told her. I sent her the email, the screenshots. She was quiet for a long time. That's really bad, she said finally. Word traveled slowly, but it traveled. People asked questions. Some took her side, others didn't. The story didn't stay neat. It never does. The buyer shipped the dress back. When the box arrived, I didn't open it right away. It sat by the door for 2 days. I wasn't sure what I'd feel when I saw it again. When I finally unboxed it, the lace was slightly wrinkled from travel. The hem still had that faint stain. It smelled faintly of someone else's home, but it was intact. I held it for a moment, then put it back in the box. My husband watched from the doorway. I'm glad you got it back, he said. I am too, I said. And I meant it, but not in the way he thought. The consequences didn't stop with her. A week later, my husband was called into his manager's office. His mother had shown up at his workplace during lunch, demanding to see him. She'd been escorted out. His manager asked if everything was okay at home. He came home shaken, angry, embarrassed. This has gone too far, he said. Yes, I said. It has. He asked me if I could call the platform and drop the report. I told him no. She's my mother, he said. She's not well. She made choices, I said. So did you. He slept on the couch that night. The spare room became a battleground. Her boxes were still there. I asked him to move them out. He said she had nowhere else to put them. I said that wasn't my problem. We stopped eating dinner together. We stopped asking about each other's days. The marriage didn't explode. It thinned. The external consequences were messy and imperfect. There was no moment where everyone agreed I'd been wronged. No apology that fixed anything. Just a series of outcomes that couldn't be undone. Her account stayed frozen. The money from the dress was returned to the buyer, not to her. She lost access to that income stream. She blamed me publicly. But privately, something shifted. People stopped assuming she was always right. And I stopped assuming I had to protect her image at the expense of my own reality. I had my dress back. I had documentation. I had witnesses, even if some were reluctant. What I didn't have anymore was the illusion that this could all be smoothed over. The consequences were out in the open now, and there was no going back to pretending they weren't there. After everything went public, after the platform froze her account, and the dress came back and the family lines were quietly redrawn, I expected to feel some kind of relief. Closure, maybe. Validation. Something solid that would tell me I'd done the right thing. Instead, I felt unmoored. It was like my internal compass had been knocked out of alignment. I'd spent so long questioning my reactions that even when I was proven right, I didn't trust the feeling. I'd wake up in the morning with a knot in my stomach, already bracing for something I couldn't name. I started noticing how often I apologized. To cashiers, to coworkers, to my husband, even when we barely spoke. Sorry slipped out of my mouth before I could stop it, like a reflex. I caught myself softening my tone, minimizing my words, preemptively justifying my feelings, even when no one had challenged them yet. It scared me how automatic it was. I replayed moments from the past with new eyes, conversations that had left me feeling off, but not knowing why. Times I'd backed down because it seemed easier. I realized how often I'd been trained, slowly and quietly, to doubt my own perception. The most unsettling part wasn't her behavior anymore. It was how deeply it had gotten under my skin. My husband and I moved around each other like strangers sharing a lease. We spoke in logistics. Who was buying groceries? When bills were due? Who needed the car? Anything deeper felt dangerous, like it might crack something open that neither of us knew how to fix. At night, I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, the rhythm of his breathing when he slept in the bedroom, and I took the couch. My mind kept circling the same questions. How long had this been happening? Had I always been this easy to override? What else had I given up without realizing it? I started therapy, telling myself it was for stress management, for recovery. In the first session, the therapist asked why I was there. I opened my mouth to answer and burst into tears instead. I talked about the dress, about the emails, about the way my mother-in-law spoke in calm, reasonable tones, while saying things that made me feel small, about my husband's silences. The therapist didn't interrupt. When I finished, she asked one question. When did you stop trusting yourself? I didn't have an answer. I just knew it hadn't happened all at once. The psychological impact showed up in strange ways. I hesitated before making small decisions, like choosing what to eat or what route to drive. I'd think, is this reasonable? Am I overreacting? Even when no one else was involved. I caught myself drafting texts and rereading them 10 times before sending, stripping out anything that might sound too firm, too emotional, too much. One afternoon, I stood in front of the spare room door, staring at her boxes. They were still there. My husband said he was working on it, that she needed time. I felt a familiar urge to let it go, to avoid another conflict. Instead, I felt something else rise up. Not anger. Fatigue. I moved the boxes myself. It took 2 trips to carry them to the garage. My arms shook by the end, and I had to sit down on the floor to catch my breath. But when I closed the door behind the last one, I felt steadier than I had in weeks. That scared me too. How good it felt to act without asking permission. I started setting small boundaries, almost experimentally, saying no without explanation, ending conversations when they turned dismissive, not answering texts right away. Each time, my heart raced, waiting for consequences. For anger, for withdrawal, for someone to tell me I'd gone too far. Sometimes it came, sometimes it didn't. When it did, I noticed something new. The discomfort didn't kill me. It didn't mean I was wrong. It just meant someone else didn't like it. That realization landed slowly, but when it did, it was heavy. I saw how much of my identity had been shaped around keeping things smooth, being agreeable, being understanding, letting things slide. I'd thought of those as strengths. Now I wasn't so sure. My mother-in-law sent me a long email one night. I didn't open it for 2 days. When I finally did, it was full of familiar phrases. How hurt she was, how betrayed, how she'd only ever tried to help, how she didn't recognize the person I'd become. I read it once and closed it. I didn't respond. That was harder than arguing would have been. Arguing meant engagement. Silence meant acceptance of reality as it was. My husband noticed. "You're really done," he said one evening, not accusing, just observing. "Yes," I said. He nodded slowly, like he was processing something he'd been avoiding. I don't know what that means for us. Neither did I, but for the first time I didn't rush to reassure him. The internal shift wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, uneven. Some days I felt strong and clear. Other days I spiraled, convinced I'd blown up my life over a dress. Over pride. Over nothing. On those days I'd pull up the email again, read her words, read his response, ground myself in facts. This happened. You didn't imagine it. You didn't cause it. That became my quiet mantra. I stopped trying to explain myself to people who'd already decided who I was. I stopped chasing understanding from those who benefited from my confusion. I wasn't healed. I wasn't confident. But I was aware. And that awareness changed everything. It made it impossible to slip back into the old version of myself. The decision didn't arrive as a single moment. There was no slammed door, no packed suitcase waiting by the wall. It came together slowly, the way pressure builds in a room you don't realize is sealed until it's hard to breathe. It started with a conversation that should have been simple. My husband came home one evening and told me his mother wanted to meet. Just the 3 of us. She wanted to clear the air. "I won't," I said. He blinked. "You won't what?" "I won't meet with her," I said. "Not like that." He frowned. "She's trying to fix things." "She wants to reset them," I said. "There's a difference." He sighed, the familiar sound of frustration mixed with fatigue. "You can't avoid her forever." "I'm not avoiding her," I said. "I'm choosing not to engage." "That's the same thing," he said. "No," I said. "It's not." We stood there facing each other, the space between us thick with everything we hadn't resolved. I realized, watching his expression, that he wasn't confused about my boundary. He just didn't like it. "What do you want, then?" he asked. The question hung in the air. It was the first time he'd asked it without immediately following it with a reason I was being unreasonable. I took a breath. "I want my life to be mine," I said. "I want my things to be mine, my feelings to be mine, and I want a partner who backs me up when someone crosses a line, even if that someone is his mother." He looked away. "You're asking me to cut her off." "I'm asking you to stop letting her hurt me," I said. "Those are not the same." He shook his head slowly. "I don't know how to do that without hurting her." Something in me went quiet then. Not angry, not defensive, just clear. "And you're okay with hurting me," I said. He didn't answer. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because my mind was racing, but because it was strangely calm. I lay there listening to the sounds of the apartment, feeling like I was already halfway gone. In the morning, I called a lawyer. I told myself it was just to understand my options, to be informed. That's what I said out loud when I made the appointment. But sitting in that office a week later, answering questions about finances and timelines and assets, I knew I'd already decided something important. I just hadn't admitted it yet. The lawyer asked why I was considering separation. I started with the dress, then stopped myself. "It's not about that," I said. "It's about trust." She nodded like she'd heard that sentence 100 times. At home, my husband noticed the change before I said anything. I stopped checking in, stopped explaining where I was going, stopped cushioning my words. One night, he asked if I was pulling away. "Yes," I said. "Why?" he asked. "Because I can't stay where I'm not safe," I said. He looked startled. "I'd never hurt you." "I know," I said. "But you let it happen." That distinction mattered to me more than he seemed to understand. The permanent decision formed fully the day his mother showed up again. I wasn't home. She'd used her key. I came back from the grocery store and found her in the living room, sitting on the couch like she belonged there, her purse on the table. My husband stood nearby, tense. "I just wanted to talk," she said, standing up. "You've been avoiding me." I set the grocery bags down carefully. "You're not supposed to be here," she scoffed. "This again." I turned to my husband. "Did you invite her?" He hesitated. "She was upset." I nodded. That was it. The final confirmation. "I'm done," I said. They both looked at me, startled. "I'm done living like this," I said. "I'm done being talked over, ignored, overridden. I'm done with my boundaries being treated like suggestions." She opened her mouth to speak. I held up a hand. "No," I said. "I'm not explaining myself anymore." I went into the bedroom and closed the door. My hands were shaking, but my thoughts were steady. I pulled a suitcase from the closet and started packing. Not everything, just what I needed. My husband came in a few minutes later. "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving," I said. "For the night?" he asked. I met his eyes. "No." His face went pale. "You can't just—" "I can," I said. "And I am." She knocked on the door. "This is dramatic," she called through it. "You're overreacting." I laughed then. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable it almost felt scripted. I finished packing, and walked past them both without stopping. My mother-in-law stared at me like I was someone she didn't recognize. My husband followed me to the door. "Please," he said. "Don't do this." I paused, my hand on the knob. "I already did," I said. I stayed with my sister that night, and the next, and the one after that. I filed for separation 2 weeks later. Telling people was awkward. Some were supportive. Some asked what really happened, like they were waiting for a juicier explanation. I kept it simple. "There was a breach of trust," I said, "and it didn't get repaired." My mother-in-law sent messages I didn't read. My husband sent messages I did, at first. Apologies mixed with confusion. Promises to change that never quite addressed the core issue. I stopped responding. The decision felt permanent, not because it was dramatic, but because it was aligned. For the first time in a long time, my actions matched what my body had been telling me. I wasn't leaving because of a dress. I was leaving because I refused to spend the rest of my life convincing people that I deserved basic respect. Once that decision was made, everything else followed naturally. The fear didn't disappear. The grief didn't either. But the doubt did. And that changed everything. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. After the separation papers were filed, there was no dramatic fallout, no confrontation that tied things up neatly. Just logistics. Emails about dividing accounts, short messages about mail forwarding and furniture. My husband moved out first, then I did. We stopped using each other's names and started using phrases like the apartment and the car and that box in storage. The dress came with me. I didn't hang it up right away. I kept it folded in the box. It had been shipped back in, taped shut, under my bed at my sister's house. For weeks, I didn't touch it. It wasn't avoidance exactly. It just didn't feel urgent anymore. That surprised me. I expected the dress to feel heavy, symbolic, loaded. Instead, it felt neutral, like something that had completed its role. My sister never asked about it. She gave me space in the way that feels intentional, not distant. I slept in her guest room and woke up early, listening to her kids get ready for school, the normal rhythm of someone else's life carrying on. It helped. It reminded me that the world didn't hinge on what I'd lost. The first time I ran into my mother-in-law after everything was at a grocery store. I was in the produce aisle, picking up apples, when I heard my name. I turned, and there she was, her cart half full, her expression stiff with surprise. For a second, neither of us spoke. "You look thin," she said finally. "I'm fine," I said. She glanced at my left hand. The ring was gone. "So it's true," she said. "Yes," I said. She nodded, lips pressed together. "I never thought you'd actually leave." No," I said. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was something uncertain in her eyes. Something I'd never seen there before. Not remorse. Not understanding. Just the absence of control. "Well," she said, straightening. "I hope you're happy." I thought about that. "I'm calmer," I said. "That's enough for now." I walked away before she could respond. My hands shook afterward, but not with regret, just with adrenaline. I sat in my car and breathed until it passed. The divorce finalized 3 months later. My husband and I didn't see each other in person again after that last exchange at the apartment. Everything went through lawyers. He sent one final message the day it was signed. I never wanted this outcome. I stared at it for a long time before replying. Neither did I, but I couldn't live the other one. He didn't respond. In the months that followed, people asked questions, some out of concern, some out of curiosity. I learned quickly who deserved real answers and who didn't. If someone pushed, I said, there were ongoing boundary issues. If they pressed further, I said, I wasn't respected. That usually ended it. A few people tried to reframe it for me, told me marriages were hard, that mothers-in-law were complicated. that maybe time would have fixed it. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't need them to agree. The biggest change wasn't external. It was internal, and it showed up in ordinary moments. I noticed I no longer rehearsed conversations in advance. I stopped scanning rooms for reactions. When I said no, I didn't add qualifiers. I let silences exist without rushing to fill them. It wasn't confidence. Not exactly. It was alignment. One afternoon, months later, I finally opened the box. I did it alone, in my new apartment, a small one-bedroom with uneven floors and windows that let in too much light in the mornings. I laid the dress out on the bed carefully, smoothing the lace, noticing how the fabric caught in the places it always had. I thought I might cry. I didn't. I remembered the day I wore it, how I'd felt standing there, believing I was stepping into something solid. I didn't feel embarrassed by that memory. I felt tender toward it. I folded the dress back up. I didn't keep it. I donated it to a local organization that provided formal wear to people who couldn't afford it. I dropped it off myself. I didn't tell anyone. There was no ceremony to it. Just a quiet decision. When I walked back to my car, I felt lighter. Not because I'd let go of the dress. Because I'd reclaimed the choice. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about the early days, about how easy it was to overlook small violations, how reasonable everything sounded when it was wrapped in concern, how quickly my sense of self eroded without me noticing. I don't beat myself up for that anymore. I understand now that trust doesn't disappear all at once. It thins, it frays. And if you're taught to doubt yourself, you don't always notice the moment it snaps. What I know now is simple. If someone can decide your feelings don't matter while you're lying in a hospital bed, they've already decided who you are to them. And if the person who's supposed to protect you helps them do it, that's information. Not a failure. Not a challenge to overcome. Just information. My life is quieter now. Smaller, in some ways. But it's mine. My things stay where I put them. My no means no. My memories belong to me. I don't miss the dress. I don't miss the marriage. What I miss, sometimes, is the version of myself who thought love meant endurance. But I don't want her life anymore. I want this one. And that, finally, feels like enough. Who smiled through discomfort? The one who doubted her own reactions before doubting anyone else's intentions. I didn't know yet what permanent shape my life would take after this. I just knew that whatever Worstit came next would have to be built on something different, something that didn't require me to disappear to keep the peace.